We are a design studio that is based out of Bhubaneswar that creates elegant, ethnically inspired and environmentally friendly products. The idea behind Beats was that we have a firm belief in the power of art and design to make people's lives better. So, our products are completely handmade. They're contemporary. ADC, Art, Design and Conversation, is an attempt towards that. It's a series that has dialogues with accomplished professionals spanning diverse realms of art and design. And we seek to unravel the ecological and communal consequences associated with mass manufactured goods.
My wife and I were on a long road trip this past Holy weekend. We had gone to Koraput. And I have taken up, when I'm driving long distances, I've gotten into the habit of listening to history podcasts. Now, it's hard to believe for a lot of people that in school, I had actually once failed my history paper. That's because NCERT do their very best to make any textbook as uninteresting and tedious and boring as they can to kill any hint of interest in any child. So if we speak that language of scientists and published papers and graphs and maps to people will lose interest. Most people and I'm talking about urban people primarily because urban people are usually sort of distanced from nature. Most people develop an interest in the natural world from something they might have seen on TV or, back in the day, magazine pictures, today probably Instagram pictures. But photography and cinematography have always been the primary and probably the most far-reaching ways of conservation communication across communities. Forget communities just living next to wildlife habitats, across any communities, because fewer and fewer people read these days, but back in the day, before photography and cinematography became accessible, most people developed an interest from books that they read about, popular books, not journals, popular books. So I'll use a borrowed analogy. Just like I was mentioning that science and politics and social science are the bedrocks of conservation action. A tree, if you take a tree for example, its roots are what sustain it, just like science and politics sustain or implement conservation to keep it alive. The roots of a tree keep the tree alive. But, a tree needs to flower, it needs to fruit, it needs to pollinate, it needs it needs bees to come and, pollinate its flowers, it needs birds and fruit bats to come in, and monkeys and deer and even people to come and feed on its fruits so that they can then poop out its seeds and help the tree disperse. And the roots do absolutely nothing to enable that. A tree has to make itself attractive for all these other creatures to take an interest in it. Not my own, but yeah. It has to produce flowers that smell nice, that look attractive. It has to produce fruit that look delicious in order to attract all the other creatures that help it complete its life cycle. Merely remaining alive using its roots is not enough. So, just like that, to communicate conservation, to communicate the science of conservation to people, art is the only way. Of course, you can call popular writing an art as well, but that's, I think, the only way to express to people, because very few people will have the attention span required to go through a published journal or policy papers and things like that.
I love it. We're pulling on threads here. So in this short while, we pulled on the thread of working with communities, listening to them. We pulled on the thread of multidisciplinary approaches where you engage creative expression with other disciplines to kind of create a holistic view on subject. And we've also pulled on the fact that communicating complex scientific findings, communicating the very importance of everything that surrounds us and the challenges to it is also another way that art can intersect with this. Now let me shift to one area, which is we have people who are here who are policy advisors. Charwa is also here. The question on policy. We know that we cannot move the dial alone. We have to work with government, we have to work with stakeholders, we work with people so that change can happen. You can't do it alone. So when it comes to art, which is such a powerful medium as we have seen, what has been your experiences or what are your thoughts on policy changes or policy influencing policy using creative expression and engagement to bring to light things that sometimes get thrust under the carpet because policy has to be a lot more overarching while communities might be left behind, the people thoughts might be left behind. I know you've been involved in that, so I'm just going to flip this question to Ravi first and then we'll go around on this.
I'm not sure how to answer the.
I'm not sure how I can answer the question the way you ask it. Policy is a particular sphere of governance and politics and society, right? It has a certain structure. But instead of answering the question the way you ask it in terms of policy, because policy is governed by so many things, it's also incremental, it also has to take so many other things into account. Let's shift to the idea of knowledge making. What constitutes knowledge? How do we know something? And increasingly you see in many parts of the world this collaboration between art and science. You see them less here, but it's starting to open up. For example, in the Science Gallery in Bengaluru, which is set up to do that. But you find in the Max Planck Institute in Germany, artist residencies invite. There's a whole tradition for a long time for CERN to invite artists to interact. And this is a recognition that just one way of knowing the world is not enough to find the solutions to the world. It's also to have like you said, very good example of flowering. It's not a single parameter thing, and science by its only method deals with only to complexity to a certain extent. Because science is also a method. We forget it's a method of making knowledge. Of course, and they could have many other methods. Historically, science could have different methods, but this is the empiricity, the various thing about the way we do science. And science is also then used politically because it's then become part of the development paradigm that science-based policy becomes the most important part of it. We normally say science-based policy, natural science-based policy. So science is also defined mostly in the, STEM sciences. I've been on many national committees for environmental standards, and you find no social scientists in those committees. These are either scientists or engineers like me or somebody else. And of course, very few women, but that's another story. So I think that you'll find no member of the labor union there, for example. So there's a certain kind of paradigm in which policy is made, and we found that you can see that we are still hurtling towards a crisis. The Club of Rome in 1971 said that we are at the limit of growth, that nature has a limit. And then Reagan and Thatcher threw them out, saying that this is nonsense. And today, they're saying it's already too late. Like, we see the limits are appearing. The Arctic cap will have no summer ice by the next 25 years. So these are major shifts going on in the world because of human-induced climate change. So it's a recognition of this, that there's a sort of pullback saying we need to know more because this trajectory of this kind of knowing the world doesn't lead to the right decisions, So it is for that reason that you find that they're talking across the board. Because, there is a the spaceship is not going in the way we want it to go, because we are a safe spaceship as a planet Earth, as the famous Blue Planet picture shows us. So I think it is because of this that there is impetus to open up a bit more. Not completely, it's opening up a bit more. And I think in the academia, it's opening up to this idea of multidiscipline and transdiscipline. These are relatively new words, and still academia cannot fully deal with them because the method issue is not very, how does I'm currently doing a project on glaciers with a glaciologist who lives in South America, and it's a long distance collaboration. And so it's a realization both ways, no? And she's talking about how scientists think, because she's a natural scientist in a sense. And she's how much we learned from talking to me and how much I learned from talking to her in a sense. So I think that this will lead to policy. There was a time when IITs had only engineers, but now the humanities departments in almost all the engineering colleges. Right? How effective they are, how much they interact is a separate story, but they're there. So these recognitions are because we have seen that this is not helping in a sense, and this primacy of one way of knowing the world is not leading us right. Otherwise, why would we have crossed 1.5 degrees in the climate issue? We should have managed it. We haven't managed it. So science is just not enough.
Brilliant. Jana?
No, I think knowledge does not always have very correct thoughts. It's a conflict of understanding policy and all.
Yeah, Ravi is reaching out for it. So, on the policy topic, what are your thoughts?
Well, policy making is, decreasingly sort of top down these days, I would guess. I mean, or I would like to believe.
Yeah,
Especially
from the ground up
Yeah.
more important.
Yes. And when it comes to science-based policy making, art has always played a big role in it. Um, you know, Policy makers are always pressured by public opinion. Public opinion is increasingly being shaped by art, and in a country like India, primarily cinema, I guess. And I see very small but an increasing number of conservation biologists actually working simultaneously with artists, with photographers, with filmmakers to get their message out. I think Kriti would be a nice example. When conservation biologists or any scientists for that matter are working on something, when they've uh, made a finding at the end of their research or at the end of their work, the typical way for them to go ahead is to have their findings published somewhere reputable after it goes through a lot of scrutiny and is approved and for publication in a journal. And earlier, I would see, and even now, unfortunately, still the vast majority of scientists will sort of close the chapter there. Okay, my paper is published, one more on the CV, case closed. But conservation scientists who are looking at making an impact are not only sending their manuscript for publication, but while they have been researching the subject, they are frequently having a team of, say, photographers and filmmakers documenting their work, documenting their study, documenting their findings. Almost as soon as the paper is published, they have a film ready to communicate the findings of that paper, as I said, mostly Latin, in very simple, graspable sort of a format in a 10-minute or 12-minute short film. And, at the same time, as soon as all of this is done, they are increasingly using, we have, in fact, one very good science communicator through art in our state, a young man called Sudarshan Shaw, who does wildlife. He communicates conservation issues through Patachitra. And of course, he started out by doing it popularly by himself. But now he's doing it almost all over the country for various different states. Another example that I can give is a cartoonist called Rohan Chakravarti. You might have Green Humor. He's been doing such brilliant work for years now. And I increasingly see scientists and even journals that publish scientific papers engaging with these kinds of artists to express themselves better. And when you manage to publish something in popular media that has enough of a mass impact, like say an OTT platform or somewhere like that, it does have a big impact on, forget OTT platforms, even social media. These days, states are, governments and bureaucrats are so sensitive to what's out there on social media, what's being said on social media. It really does drive policy.
So we've heard two lines from here. If I can summarize this discussion here, there's an element of knowledge creation, which can ultimately lead to policy information on policy making. There's an element of activism, which you just talked about, where you can actually harp on the fact that there is a challenge in a way that makes sense, in a way through channels that really hit hard with the policymakers, so that at the end of the day you can give voice to the voiceless or stakeholders that may not have that kind of opinion. So we have had many different aspects that we've talked about. Uh, Before I hand it over to the crowd to ask questions, your final thoughts, and if I can like distill it down, what would be your, in the future, single biggest effort going in climate action where you would want to use art or creative expression as your ally to drive through the point where you nice, really beautiful. Final thoughts on that question. I'll start with Aditya, just kind of put it.
Well, uh, I would say communicate, 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 but then there is no really, there is no one big thing.
Well, let's talk about a dream project that you have in the future. Maybe it's the Rusicolet, the tortoises, maybe turtles, maybe it's the Sarkosia Tiger Project. It could be one of those things where you would want to see an engagement in all the different forms that we've talked about: advocacy, communication, multidisciplinary engagement. That you can. I'm putting you on the spot. So let's see.
You are. Well, I would. It's really difficult to pinpoint one single goal like that, because even these individual examples that you cited, there's never one final goal in conservation. Like I was saying, it's always a continuous process, and whatever progress that we have made so far in each of these two examples that you cited, be it Rushikulya, well, not maybe to such an extent in Satkosia, it has always been driven by popular communication of these issues. It's always been those pictures of dead turtles on the beach, that have worried people, that have worried whoever the chief wildlife warden or the chief minister, the forest minister of the day is, when they come out in the papers, and it's always the pictures of hundreds and thousands of turtles coming to nest on the beach that has gotten people awed by a lot of, not everybody in Odisha has been to Rishikulia, but everybody knows that there is such a thing as the Aribada that happens, and it's a spectacle. No one really knew. I'm sure when you were growing up, the newspapers never published these pictures. Newspapers hardly published pictures, but back then. But till the newspaper started publishing these pictures, people were not even aware. So, it's very difficult, as I said, to sort of have one single goal where have this one great achievement through because there are no one great achievements in conservation.
Go to any, not saying not one. So while you squirm here thinking about it.
Well, you want to know your secret project.
Yeah, I want to know your secret project. Now that you've learned so much about where art and climate change can intersect.
My secret projects are going to remain secret. But there's no one big dream as such.
So
There are many dreams.
Any final thoughts on what we've heard today from your side?
Well, I would hope that more streams of art and more streams of artists beyond just people with cameras, be it photographers and cinematographers, engage with conservation. Try and understand conservation, because you can't communicate what you yourself do not understand. So, as an artist, Jagabhai tries to tell a story, but he does his own homework on that story first, and before he communicates that to people through or expresses it through his art. So, yes, I would really hope that there is more engagement, not just by artists, but also by artists on this topic, because, surprising as it may seem, in a subject that is so urgent, so scary, it still remains more or less completely out of the everyday public narrative. We simply aren't worried.
Projects we can wangle out a few today.
No, there is no dream project, but every project comes with a dream. But what I've extended this ideas of communication. That's very important. Even in art pedagogy systems, I think we don't talk about this. Generally, as artists, we go into, we start making art through skates or anything, looking at the nature. That's kind of main aspect. But the method of teaching, what you're looking at, what are the you are looking at, and how you are expressing. We have not, because it's kind of artistic angle, but we need a different kind of people to engage with the artist community or the college or something, so they can see the beyond. It's not like a object or producing something. The art production is something beyond that what you artists. Globally, a lot of awareness artists are engaged very seriously. I think I forget the name of the artist, Mark Dion or something. Is it? Yeah. So done a massive artwork which is in the park. There's a big log of wood was lying in the park. So he created like a museum around it. This whole flora, fauna, bacteria, everything is growing around. People can go inside and see. He amplified what's happening, what is this kind of things are going on. It's really a great way to bringing art and science and ecology together. That is what I would say. The collaboration is very important that we have not explored, because writers or critical thinkers and artists, and they're working in a different level. Even the scientists, because the scientists are coming out the real accurate data, but it's very complex itself. But a lot of artists working with the scientists, the image production, that became very strange and beautiful. That looks completely out of the world, and that's completely bringing in a very new language to the art world. That is, I think, is important, which is missing, and we should work as a kind of collectively within the community or with in a college or artistic environment. That's very important.
So climate for pedagogy. Thoughts, final thoughts, any secret projects?
I think great art is very powerful. We cannot underestimate it. They shape ideas, they shape imaginations, they shape how we think and see the world. I can spot Jagannath's painting from a mile. I just went to do my notice in Jagannath's painting. It's so distinctive style. And I think somehow we have forgotten that art is not something to decorate something. Art is an engagement. And so while we have people who collect art, but they forget that for every work they collect, there are 10,000 works waiting to be collected. So I think we've somehow narrowed the art ecosystem to something which is to show and collect. That's a very narrow way of looking at art, you know. And so, I mean, I would like art to be recognized for what it always was and what it should be, because it's such an important part of human endeavor. And I think I would from my foundation work also. I think my dream project, if you want to use the word, would be for everybody to see that, you know, people who have capital should support these practices. People who have spaces should support these practices. These are not just some things which is an investment value. These are way in which we become human in one way or another. I think that's why we do art, because it makes us human. So it's where all values of humanity are held, you know. And I think we've somehow forgotten that in this very capitalist, uh, money mode we have entered. But we forget that there's no exit from that world, either in terms of human futures or human happiness, either, because so it is such a fundamental endeavor that my dream project would be that the artist as um, honored, recognized as a scientist or anybody else, that they are not just asked to decorate something, but they are asked to become part. We can only do what comes next to us, but what the big picture is, what's going to happen, is a larger question. So it's not about that. It's about keeping in your value. And what we have seen is that if you persist with something, things change. And maybe not change to the extent that you want them to change, but it is a humanly constructed world, and we can humanly make it again differently, in a sense. So the reason for starting then, and I don't do day-to-day running of that organization anymore because of my other independent practice, but uh, the reason why one needs such persistent places, if you want to call Utsa or beads, because by the very presence they change things. And of course, it's a difficult journey because very often you see nothing is happening. But just the very presence changes the dialogue, changes the conversation. You have a seat at the table, and you have the possibility of changing and shaping things. And I think we should not be much more ambitious than that. Except to be honestly involved in what we are doing.
So you said toxic links and all the work they've been doing in that has been one of the
Running to keep a organization with about 20-25 people running for 25 years, it's a big struggle. Any person in the civil society will tell you. It's not state funded. State funding is not something which really happens. If you're doing little critical work, which is not essentially trying to do service delivery, but you're trying to change something, then you are pretty much on your own. You pretty much have to find your own way of doing that. And that's a journey. It's a journey, but it's also its own reward. So that's why I said that you have to have the internal desire to do that. You cannot do it as a job.
Madam Aditya, if I can ask you the same question, what got you into it and what you can point and say, this was something that really, did well.
Well, um, I can't remember a point in my life when I was not madly in love with jungles and wild places. I like to quote Dr. Karan, Dr. Ullas Karan, who is one of the world's most well-known tiger biologists. He writes in one of his many good books that all children are born with an innate, not exact words, but an innate curiosity for the natural world and living things. And all children like and love nature and wildlife. It's just that our upbringing, the circumstances where we grow up, can either nurture that or completely destroy that. So if you start scaring the child saying, don't touch that bug, don't pet that dog, it'll bite you. You're, already killing those things in them. So fortunately, in my case, I survived all of that. And, growing up, I have always been fascinated by wildlife and wild places. And I was always 100% sure that no matter what I did in life, I would not end up behind a desk. I would live a life which keeps me close to nature, the great outdoors, and wild animals. So one thing led to another, and by the time I was just out of school, I sort of stumbled across an organization here, which was called Wild Odisha, based in BJP Nagar, right across the street from your house. And I was, I think, 15 or so when I walked in there, and I said, I'm interested in wildlife. I want to be part of your organization. And I had no clue what to do. So, fortunately, in Wild Odisha, I found people who mentored me, who provided me the opportunity to be out in the field. They were a very active organization back then. The people who started it were younger and could give more time and could spend time in the field. And I spent, they enabled it for a BJP Nagar boy from Bhubaneswar to be able to walk in tiger forests and elephant forests, and learn things firsthand and understand the very basics of conservation, the very basics of natural history. And then sort of over time, I managed to find a career in, first in conservation, then in safari guiding, which is what I do now. And, whenever I'm here in Odisha, which is still fortunately the major part of my year, I involve myself in conservation. I work very closely with the forest department. This has continued sort of unbroken since my Wild Odisha days. Wild Odisha, for those who do not know, is the organization that created what is now very famous as Mangla Jodi in Chilika, besides various other conservation achievements, but that's the best known. But very few people know that there's this organization that has done it. So, anyhow, to answer your next question, 2 or 3 achievements.
Just one. What was the one thing besides walking into wild Odisha? What was the one big thing you'd say?
No.
The tiger conservation project in Odisha?
No, there are no individual achievements in wildlife conservation. There cannot be. There are, even to call something an achievement in conservation, I think it always feels like it's too early. Like, hold on, don't say it out yet. You never know. I mean, conservation is a process. It's not a goal. It's something that continues. You can never say, yes, you can look at data from, over a period of time and say that, yeah, things have improved or declined or have remained stable. But conservation successes are always collective. People like you and me or you are equipped as citizens of this country to state an opinion, to seed an idea, to maybe influence policy, to maybe encourage people in positions to execute policy, to do something or the other. But we do not have the legal, we are not equipped to execute anything. Unless you are part of the system, you are not at all equipped to execute something. The execution is always done by, in the case of wildlife, say the forest department and various other line departments. So conservation successes are always collective and never individual. They cannot be individual. But yes, if you ask me if there are things that I have been involved in that provide me a lot of satisfaction, then yes, Bangla Jodi is something that is extremely satisfying. It was an absolute turnaround there. The revival of things in Satkosia, 2018, Satkosia had become very, very infamous. The state had been embarrassed. The state forest department had been embarrassed when, first when our own tigers went extinct there. Then we got tigers from another state, from Madhya Pradesh, and we messed it up. But I'm happy to say that right now, Satkosia is better than it has ever been in the last maybe 20 or 30 years or even more. Satkosia a lot of work is going into nurturing it back, into getting it ready for tigers. And in, the not very distant future, it's going to become one of, I'm very, very confident that it's going to become one of India's most promising tiger habitats.
Well, here's to that. Big clap here. That's a good song. Thanks, Hector. And Joy, we've always seen in your work a very focused approach and a very artistic approach to talk about the depredations of urban growth. We have those beautiful pictures of animals lost in the wild in your paintings. Same question. What brought you into this as one of your key practice points, and also
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Very special guest, and I'm sitting with the most important, very special people. So it's uh, looking back, 90s, when I was grew up, looking at a lot of artists who are working with environmental art, which was a key practice. Even few of them, Richard Long, that Smith, Smith of the Spiral Jetty and all. So traveling to Japan was kind of changed my mind. My first work, collaboratively respond to the nature and the wild space and understand, how, art, the environment and the body can be one. And then slowly, it became a more give an opportunity to engage in a very diverse way. I did a very large installations, collaborated with the local artists for Ave Mamuro, and we discovered a very big grassland and taken out the grass from there and engaged a lot of students to perform. I have created large igloo. So, people used to go inside and looking at the place, but also inspire me, the Japanese Shinto culture and how the nature became an important element to their life. So that's one the beginning of my art practice. But also I thought that working with nature or something diverse is also give you a larger opportunity to engage with diverse material, method, collaborations and all. That's why it's always feel like coming out of a studio practice and working with other people to see and enjoy. But coming back to the 2004 in Gurgaon, that's also surprising. But I never looked at, I'm doing something to sending a message or something, because whatever, like, seeing something unnatural and something like a trigger in a very in my artistic sense, I just respond. So what I respond is the changing landscape of the now, the rapid urbanization. In some of, they're like they're cutting the grass, like ladies, they don't know how much money they have in their account, and it's like a always like astonishing surprise moment. So every time I meet and engage with the people, so I come back to the studio and start responding those elements, so that you know uh,
Brilliant. Yeah, I think all three of you in your own worlds have use the expression, creative expression, to talk to people. Because like when we were curating this talk show, I was like, we've got Aditya and we've got Ravi. Besides the fact that they are such big exponents of the climate, environmental campaigns and all of that, we're also photographers, right? Every time we have a photography series, or we have photos of you sending a tiger walking in Simlipan, we share that, and everybody's like, "Wow, look at this beauty!" And look at there's this feeling that you get, very maternal feeling. Like, these are our own, and these are our own things that are there. So I think between the three of you, you've always used creative expression to make a point that what you have is precious, what you have is little, and what you need to do is preserve it. So, just responding on that, if you were to talk about art as a tool for awareness, just bringing to light all the things that are out there in a very visceral form, or in a very raw form, this is like the clock is ticking, guys. You don't have a lot of time. You really need to understand the impact that we have, because we are living in an Anthropocene world. What would be your thoughts on how more effective, how you've done it in your past? You've obviously drawn on everything you've done in your past. But what do you think we can do more effectively to use art and creative expression as a way of creating awareness about this? Let's start with Ravi, because he's been doing it all day. It's just, you're more, yeah. Real guy, Yeah, he's let's hear more. And activist, both in that way. Absolutely. So it's actually a very,
It's really, I get this question a lot. It's a very complicated question because art to me is not a tool of anything, so it's just an expression. And it really, I think if you want, for what it means to me is that it is a way of expressing complexity. And the complexity first has to be absorbed inside, and then it's an expression of that. And I think somehow if you are reflecting on the complexity of anything, like, if you see Aditya's painting, Jagannath's paintings, then they're not a 1+1 equal to this. They are reflective of many kind of metaphors, symbols, and an overall mood, which then allows you to think about something. So, uh, it is not secondary to something. It's not a tool of something. It is a thing of its own. And I think it is the most complex engagement I've had in my life. I know to do activist work is relatively simple because your goals are very well set. To come up with effective or art which speaks to anybody, or firstly to you, because the first art is to you. If it doesn't speak to you, it's not going to speak to anybody else. Uh, that's the first response. The second is that in terms of this art and activism, I treat art in a very broad spectrum of things, not only the visuality of things, but having dealt with institutionally and scientifically with, for example, what we call the ecological crisis. There are many sort of words here which get used a lot, like the word crisis. What is a crisis? At what point? And a friend of mine was telling me it comes from the medical idea of the crisis. So we use these words very loosely, but the idea of crisis is different in different different environments. If you go to Europe, the idea is very sort of there, and people are feeling worried what's going to happen to them and all that. Here, the sense of crisis is different. And we are also in a world where the crisis is not single valency. It's a polyverse crisis. We have many. So, of course, we think of climate change because climate change has become uh, this urgency because we can measure in temperature. But there are so many other urgencies which are related and or sometimes conflict with the idea of climate change. For example, toxicity of the environment. We have everywhere is just highly toxic, and it impacts both environmental health and or ecosystem destruction, which is what Aditya works on. Forests are part of that. So when ecosystems get destroyed, and we were having a conversation over lunch that, craft is not just an object. Craft is an outcome of a social system, right? Why do blacksmiths disappear? So these practices are disappearing because whole lifestyles, whole ecosystems are disappearing. And I do a lot of my research-based artwork, also working with communities. So I was working with the fishing community in Tamil Nadu for many years. And you can see that the whole landscape is changing. The water is coming in. So this complexity, you cannot do it only through anthropology. You cannot do it only through natural sciences or economics. It's because these disciplines we have, but life is more than these disciplines. So art is the only sphere where you have the possibility of expressing complexity without having a disciplinary method to it. And I think that's really important today because we seem to be caught in that evidence. And what is evidence? Evidence is on frames. And then, so it opens up this whole area of transdisciplinary and, even words like post-disciplinary, which are, how do you think of what is happening in the world today? It's not a simple question. And then what is really, I really am very involved in is looking at this whole breaking the veneer of things, if I may want to use the word. And I always have been working with communities because I think practices which emerge, which are located on the ground, the aesthetics which emerge from there, the politics which emerge from there, the expressions which emerge from there, are really the expression of the most vulnerable and expressions of what causes what we call the climate change. I mean, it brings to many questions of what is this nature we're talking about. So nature, this whole question of what does nature mean to indigenous person? What is indigenous knowledge? What are knowledge systems? These are all in the ambit of thinking about complexities of art. So that's where I get so involved in it. And I hope it says something to somebody else. There's no guarantee that it will say. So I'm sorry to have such a complex response to your question.
No, but this is something that we were also discussing on lunch today, where the reality of climate change is different for different people, for different communities, for different walks of life, or even countries. There's a different approach here. So as an artist, it's not your job to make it simple, but it is your job to, it's not a job, but it's a way of, art's a way of explaining this in a much more,
it's also an act of listening.
Yeah.
So when I was working with the fishing community, they know the sea is coming in. Maybe they're not measuring it in the same scale as you're measuring it. They know 20 years back the sea was different. The fish catch was different. And the sea is coming closer to the sea. They know it's happening. But somehow we've got into this frame of mind where we have to tell them about climate change. Nobody wants to ask them, what is climate change to you? So we have got in a state of mind where knowledge is communicated. And they argue in many forums that why do we have to communicate for people instead of asking what people's experiences of it? So if you then ask for experience, then you know how to relate to that. So it's not a communication from the outside. There's no point giving climate data to somebody, to a farmer. There's no meaning for, no? So why would you do that? So because you're not listening. And I think part of the problem is that we forgot to listen, deep listening, and that's also about multi-species worlds. We don't listen. Aditya probably does it every day. Listen to the animals. And there are so many worlds out there. It's not only the human world. And somehow we have to think of that as a way out of any crisis. That we're not alone on this planet.
That's a brilliant thought. Art as a way of listening to real world problems and real world challenges, and then talking about it also through the lenses of different species. And that's also drawing towards the fact that very successful engagements with creative expression in this is also a function of how well you are engaging with communities. Just talked about the fishing community. So there are other communities where artists have also worked and have come up with some really powerful expressions. What's your thought on that, Jagannath? Is art as a way of community engagement to bring out these challenges of ecology and climate?
Yeah, you rightly say it's listening to others. That's very important part. But if you ask me like a simple artist or anyone, these ideas of climate change is very complex, super complex. We don't know where to start and all. But a simple way I can see that the whole world, if anything happen in any part of the world, it's also affecting in a micro level. And maybe we don't know, last time the project we talked about, how the plastics are moved one continent to other. Because it's all the world we call connected, either through the war or sad or happiness in a human or species, everything have a interconnected. That is very important to understand that this body is the second body, but the nature is the first body. That the ecosystem to understand that if that body is not good or not in communicate, this body also survive, because it's also coming to find that if we take out from this wind or air or water or anything, so what we as a species will survive. But in terms of art, what you say, like it's important that to discuss or collaborate. But in here, I want to do art, like maybe this is the best way to scientist or artist or administrator to come together and activist to come together and find solution. And art, I think, is the most novel and very personal way to connecting the people. That is what is very important. Art, any form of engagement, bringing art in the forefront.
I think it's a brilliant point because the other bit that's coming out of this for a complex problem, creative expression plus infrastructure, engineering solutions, all of that, it has to be a multidisciplinary approach that cuts across many things. And I think listening as a way of doing that with communities and approaching it with a multidisciplinary approach and not thinking of art as, okay, let's do a final, painting and show or a photography show, what happened here. Instead, it's continuous engagement with all the other disciplines. So just flipping this back to you, Aditya, with your work, you also work with a lot of tribal communities. You work with a lot of the forest communities. You are very constantly in touch with nature. They're infected with the flow and ebb and flow of what's happening out there. And you are also a photographer. So putting on both hats, where would you say, even let's take in the context of Odisha, where would you say there would be elements where creative expression can work very closely with conservation, for example, in your sphere?
Well, you see, creative expression has always been the only thing that's worked with communicating conservation. You see, conservation, wildlife conservation, or any sort of environmental issue of climate related, have lots of large resorts and homestays and things like that around them, which during normal times when there's no COVID and no lockdown and planes are flying and people are coming, tourists occupy them. But when COVID came, when lockdowns happened, of course, no business came. But people abandoned their urban bases. They rented rooms for months. They took internet is now available everywhere. Everywhere you get a geo signal and you can get a hotspot. And people started living in homestays and resorts in places like Kana National Park for months on end, just so that they could get out of their room and take a walk and not get picked up by the police. So it takes one, that I think was a test of the resilience of our urban cluster based civilization. And, I don't want to sound apocalyptic, but things are changing and things are changing pretty fast and pretty badly. And the long term future, even in the next 20 years, 30 years, is not urban. It's not urban. Just today, I was reading an article which was critiquing, not criticizing, critiquing the India Met Department's um, way of classifying heat waves. So it was saying that it's too simplistic. That there's very, there's some very vague rules that if in the hills it crosses 30 degrees, then it's a heat wave. In the plains, in the coast, 37 degree, and I think in the plains and interiors, it's 30.
What are you talking about? Rajasthan.
Yeah, 40 degrees. But it does not describe things like, it does not describe things like, what is known as wet bulb temperature. You live in Delhi and you go to Rajasthan. Most of my summer, half of my summer is spent in Rajasthan, half of it is spent in Bhubaneswar. I go to Ranthambore National Park in the peak of summer, April, May, and June, where I experience maybe 47, 48, 50 degrees heat. If you're next to the rocks, it's even higher. I survive that without much complaint. I come back home, plane door opens, you step out into Bhubaneswar air. It might be 35 Celsius, not more, or 30 Celsius, and you feel like you'll die. That's known as wet bulb temperature. Wet bulb temperature basically is that it's humid heat. Humid heat is, when the humidity is so high that your sweat cannot evaporate, you will die of heat stroke. And we have been suffering in India an increasing number of days of wet bulb temperatures that are beyond human survival levels. Not just humans, plants, animals, many other species. And if you have a heat wave period of a week or 2 weeks in a summer, it's okay. You understand it happens. We'll stay home. If that increases to 2 or 3 months, then it becomes impossible to live in an area like this, right? And if you eventually begin to have an, extremely large number of intolerably hot days, which we are about to see in the next decade and a half, no one knows. There are all kinds of prophecies, some very sort of optimistic ones giving us more time, some more urgent ones saying it could be as close as 2040, when large parts of the tropics are going to become uninhabitable because of an intolerably high number of hot days, which are beyond human survival limits. So, what will happen to the urban clusters then? I don't think anybody is going to think about your real estate investments. Think whether they'll actually increase in 20 years from now or not.
Ravi, do you want to take the question?
How you meant it in a personal way, you went in an ethical value way, in a Gandhian kind of way, we will change you.
Not exactly Gandhian, but yeah, some kind of instructality listen to creative process.
I mean, that's a very difficult question to answer for oneself, but I think the fact that Jagannath does this and holds this place is itself a recognition of the values he holds for us. I think so. We all reflect our values. I mean, the larger conversation of what is nature, which we've had sometimes, but I think nature is a relationship. Basically, it's not. There's something out there and something here, and the relationship forms what nature becomes to us. In a sense, it's not absolute nature. The dog nature is different to us. To me, to Mr. Ambani, it might be something different, because he'll destroy the forest. I can't destroy the forest. So it's a very different question of with what idea you come to the world and what the world means to you. And I think for me, the idea is what values you hold and how do you live those values. You can also answer, do I compost my waste? That's one thing which reflects something. And there are limits to what you can do in that, because these are infrastructure and convenience questions as well. You can say, okay, I switch on my air conditioner. People say, well, you're sitting in an air conditioned room and switch it off. How long will you survive? So these are all these things.
Yeah, that's a very good example, the air conditioning itself.
Yeah.
Actually, that becomes a vicious cycle.
Yeah, so there are many very vicious cycles which are beyond your control.
But I think individual
And the
level
point
also
is, how do you
Yeah.
what you do internally with those things.
Yeah.
And some of these are challenging, the struggles, and some you try and express in different ways in which you conduct your life. And I think there's a famous quote of Nehru about Gandhi. I could be wrong, so don't sort of hold me. But I think he once said, Mahatma ji, आप please first class में travel करिए. Third class में travel जब करते हैं, it costs us more money than to travel first class. So there are all these questions about, what is the possibility of what we can do. But I think ultimately, what are the values with which you do it? And in this room, I think you see some of that struggles. The fact you're an artist and what you do with your life, I think, and that's what I canvas for artists. I mean, even if we look at Indian artists who are selling very high rates, and we have one sort of a friend here. So even if we look at those, it's a relationship with what they have managed to do it. It's a great success, but they also, what you bring back, what you give back is very important. I don't know. I don't want to be a judge of anybody's value system.
And on that,
It's too or to judge anything like this. It's not my place to.
But at some point, we reach when some kind of collective, you can say collective ethical position is also imperative.
Yeah, I think all the people you interacted will have an ethical position. No? They're not closet capitalists.
Yeah, yeah, that's
So if you're not, then you're struggling with the system you're in. You don't have control over it, but you're struggling with it.
we'll take one last comment from Jagannath.
Yes.
Everybody asks such complex questions.
Yeah, it's very complex.
Like way short.
But one aspect is, managing your resource and what intelligent way of your taking your research out. Because recently I saw the video this is from Bangalore, using one tank next to the SE. All the water drops are collecting there. And then there's a little tap, you can collect all the water and then reuse it somewhere. But very, very intelligent, and these are only engineers can think, even the artist some point. But for your heat wave thing, I remember that Age of Stupid, that film documentary of the BBC. Amazing. Yes, people must see that. That when you really fear to your life, that where exactly you live. Actually, we need we have not enough fear. The one thing is the COVID give us a big fear, but it's gone out of memory. We completely forget what happened, what kind of struggle, just close to our death, we come back. So recently, there's the couple of in Gurgaon, they visit me. They are planning from Gurgaon, they wanted to settle down in Koraput. They don't know about the Koraput. And one is a designer, one is the artist. It really surprised me. They visited my home and then spent some time. And they said, no, we want to have a large farmland. We will want to run our, office from there. And the strategy is what? From Vizag to Koraput, where they find it, only 2 hours. And the beautiful large hill area, they do talk about the temperature was balanced. I say, I'm stupid. I cannot think about like this. So I think they already moved to Koraput. So this is the way the people are like migrating from one place to other.
Yeah,
and they can future that.
They should do fast because everybody is going.
Yeah.
It's an Indian government will become Bhubaneswar. The whole of Goa will be Goa.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody.
Okay, one last question. We really overshot now. Please, can you say it? Say it.
Hi all, I am Aditya Panda. I am a landscape architect by profession, and I think my profession actually merges the line between art and science. We do walk that, right? We have the, I won't say I have the courage, we are prepared to change minds of people, of our clients, and pursue that we can be a person to mitigate that climate change, at least on their side, right? So I totally agree with what Aditya Panda had said. Communicate. I do feel there's an extension to it. It's educate, organize, and lead. What we are doing right now is educate. What Jagannath sir has made is an organization. And I hope everybody from here is going to lead in their own ways. So, as I speak, I have a question for Aditya. Like I have always asked him, and I'm intrigued by his role in forest conservation because I feel he has a pivotal role in changing minds of the people in forest department, who I understand have the authority to change, but yet they are unaware of the stakeholders who might be able to change, right? So I'm not speaking because I'm a landscape architect. I tell you, it's not. It's just a part of the speech I am going to give. So I just ask you, how can you make the forest department aware that there are landscape architects, that there are environmental planners who do policy. We have talked quite a lot about policies, right? These are environmental planners who are consultant to the government, who actually work on policies, who understand what is going to affect what. And we just see the face of the bureaucrat who is doing that. But these are the backstage people who do it, right? So I just want you to be the spokesperson for my profession, for my allied profession of environmental planners, to be that person who can relay that word to the forest department. Can you be?
Absolutely, I'll put in a word. You know, the way in which the forest department has been functioning since the British period, if you look at the a forest officer of a region is expected to do everything, from protecting the forests and managing the forest to protecting wildlife to being a expert on wildlife when there are no other experts available, to building culverts, to digging water harvesting structures, to building forest bungalows and building forest roads. A forest officer, and to being a social scientist, to dealing with the communities. Forest officer has to be everything from a botanist to a zoologist to a landscape manager to administrator to an engineer to a social scientist. And the tradition in the forest department has always been that there are standard designs and standard, there's something called forest engineering, a short course that they're taught. And if you look at forest bungalows, for example, forest rest houses, they all have more or less the same sort of basic layout and design. And the department has basically never hired engineers from outside or architects from outside. They've had a tradition of doing it all on their own. And in today's day and age, they're being required to build more than forest bungalows. So a lot of ecotourism money is just being dumped on them, and they're being asked to come up with ecotourism sites. And then that is when, when they begin to go beyond the 200-year-old prescriptions of the British Indian Forest Service and start to apply their own creativity and own architectural liberty and start to come up with structures that really look hideous. Then there's no other way to describe that. But yes, I'll definitely put in a word with people up in the ranks here to try and take the services of landscape artists instead of doing, just random nursery designing themselves. But having said that, I would also like to tell something about not just the forest department, but Indian bureaucracy in general. A lot of people. No. A lot of people want to communicate a lot of things to bureaucrats, but there is a perception that they are, difficult to access.
Perception only.
In most cases, yes. I would think definitely in most cases. Regardless, it doesn't hurt to try. If you just walk into, any DFO's office or even the PCCF's office here and just send in a note saying you would like to meet them, in 8 cases out of 10, I won't say 9, 8 cases out of 10 or 8 people out of 10 will be willing to give you an audience and to listen to you. And if there is merit in what you're saying, they will usually act on it. So they're not that inaccessible. And I see a lot of people just not putting in the effort of accessing people and just, outraging on social media on various issues, be it forest fires or elephants getting killed or whatever happens every day. Every day you open a newspaper in Odisha, there's elephants dying. People like to, it's just easier to outrage on social media, but approach these people and you'll be surprised how receptive they might be.
Okay, and on that note, to talk to your friendly neighborhood bureaucrat and get some ideas out there, I'd like to thank all of you and a galaxy of very bright and very knowledgeable individuals, Ravi, Jagannath, and Aditya. I'd like to thank my entire team who's been working really hard to put together that exhibition that I hope you guys have had a chance to see. I'd like to thank Jagavai and Utsa for giving this wonderful space. It's great to see it come alive again. And I'd like to thank finally all of you for spending the time here and listening to this and hopefully learning something, getting galvanized, and maybe tomorrow would be a better world rather than the apocalyptic one that we're all headed towards. And on that note, thanks everyone. Have a great evening. Cheers.